The Oklahoma medical examiner has ruled that 16-year-old Nex Benedict died by suicide. The non-binary Owasso High School student was found dead one day after a fight at school that they were involved in. Benedict's family says they'd been bullied at school. Now, the medical examiner's report found toxic levels of drugs in their system, and it does say that the death was the result of an overdose.
According to police video released last month in a 911 call on February 8th, Soave Benedict, the teen's grandmother, had expressed concern about a head injury. The teenager was conscious and alert after the fight a day earlier when they told police about the attack by 3 girls. Now, Libs of TikTok took to X after the release of the autopsy report and said, quote, "The left used this tragedy to attack Lot, and the media lied about this story for weeks, insisting that I was somehow responsible for Nex's death." Oklahoma Attorney General Gentner Drummond writes on X, quote, "My heart is broken over the tragic death of Nex Benedict. The medical examiner's finding of suicide makes me even more concerned that bullying played a role in this terrible loss," unquote. So that's an interesting read. I guess it is true, of course, that the suicide could also be related to bullying. Whether or not bullying is related to Nex Benedict's identity does seem to still be a question that's up in the air, especially given the video it showed, even in Nex's version of events, that they had kind of instigated the fight by pushing another student in the bathroom against a towel dispenser.
Yeah, I want to again say, and I think I said this during our previous commentary, that it doesn't, frankly, feel right to be even talking about this as a national news show. But like the New York Times had to write about it, the Associated Press had to write about it. Now, to kind of set the record straight, not that they said anything necessarily that was false, but there would be, because the immediate pickup of this death from people in an activist community on LGBTQ issues would just immediately said, here's another victim of violence against LGBTQ people. Frankly, before even confirming that this person identifies themselves this way, there was some, we're calling them non-binary, and they've been reported as non-binary. It seems they were kind of just young and still figuring out their gender.
Yeah, because again, in that video that was just on the
Right.
screen, Nex responds to, I think, she, her pronouns, which doesn't necessarily mean much of anything. Maybe they just didn't feel like fighting in that moment. Right. But maybe it does mean that they did respond. Yeah, you're right.
Here's a person who immediately is like, oh, this is a victim of violence and bigotry against trans people or LGBTQ people or something, and it got, talked about in all sorts of like the activist kind of publications on that, and it's a national story. And now we have to, it's kind of gross. It's sad that this person died, and there's, a New York Times headline with their picture and saying this person killed themselves, this kid. It's just, it's only necessary because there was this rush to judgment. Yeah,
so for context, the recontextualization of Nex's death in the realm of offenses against LGBTQ people was largely because of several new laws in Oklahoma that were restrictive of trans rights, which were happening at the same time, and this is from the New York Times, including one that prohibits students from using bathrooms that do not align with their sex and birth. And that, I think, the fact that there was a fight in a bathroom with someone that seemed to be within the LGBT community seemed to be enough to start to light the fire keg. And I can understand that, and I can understand why people in the community would be sensitive to that. But I think this also has to be some kind of lesson about how jumping to conclusions can ultimately serve to undermine the movement and give someone like Libs of TikTok an opportunity to say, I've been unfairly accused in this instance, even when there are other instances that we've covered where, 30-odd cases of hospitals or other institutions that Libs of TikTok has singled out that have gotten bomb threats that are real, right? That are actually connected to, or at least correlated with, shall I say?
To be fair to Libs of TikTok,
Libs have said.
High Right Chick takes the position that has said violence is wrong, and I've never have encouraged or would encourage anyone to make death threats against them, and has said that she herself has received death threats for calling attention to the things she calls attention to online.
Yeah, and there's another, sort of asymmetry, I think, that's going on here, where it does feel like we just came off of the Black Lives Matter moment and George Floyd, and there was a hyper focus on Black people who had been killed by the police. Now it seems like that is completely in the rearview mirror. There was a shooting death of a young Black boy just this past week that doesn't seem to have gotten nearly as much attention as this now apparent suicide.
Oh, I read that story. The details are horrifying. It was very much like Tamir Rice, like a case people might remember, where the kid had a fake gun, a toy gun, and was shot because of it by police. Again, this was frankly, I feel in some ways Black Lives Matter had a bad impact on this issue because years ago, before Black Lives Matter, I used to write about cases like this, and the conservatives would actually read me, would be just as outraged as a Tamir Rice type situation.
Well, this one, it was actually apparently a gardening tool, not even a toy gun. But I mean, the implications are still kind of similar.
Remember when it wasn't a death, but the infamous case where like a preschool student chewed his Pop-Tart into the shape of a gun and got expelled.
Right.
Like
yes.
that was a these are unifying kind of stories. They weren't like racially coded or left-right coded. They were just citizens can be outraged that they're being harmed by really obnoxious and unnecessary government, frankly, overregulation of your rights.
Yeah, I agree. There are specifically racial disparities that exist with over-policing. A lot of those racial disparities, but not all of them, can be attributed to class.
Yes.
There's a lot of over-policing in poor neighborhoods, and when you look at policing rates for poor whites, they're also very high. And shooting deaths of poor whites and Latinos and especially Native Americans, I think, fare the worst out of all of those groups in terms of the racial disparities. So while I can appreciate why the Black Lives Matter movement was framed the way it was, I did sometimes wonder if there were value in an additional, adjacent, simultaneous movement that was focused on police overreach of the poor and how over-policing impacts the poor. And when you had stories like, was it Philando Castile who was driving his car with the lights out and had a bunch of citations for not getting his lights fixed. He couldn't afford to have his lights fixed. He was a cafeteria worker at a school, beloved in the community. And it was because he was pulled over enough times that eventually one of those cop interactions went wrong and he was shot and killed. So, would we be in a different society with, frankly, more justice and more police reform in a way that's actually making communities safer instead of just killing people who happen to have contact with the police too often, if we broaden out the racial focus of some of these movements and got some buy-in from folks who want to be able to, frankly, carry a gun and still not get shot from the police because we live in a country where that is within the bounds of the law.
Yes, I very much agree. And there used to be more of a bipartisan, a rare example of good bipartisanship on criminal justice reform. There are still some examples of it. I saw, because it was the anniversary of Briahna Taylor's death. Rand Paul was talking about that. He co-sponsored a bill to eliminate the kind of no-knock raid that resulted in her death. That kind of thing. So that's a kind of quest for justice. I think you frame it as government accountability. Citizens have rights. We should not be over-policed. Tea Party we rebelled against the British for over-regulating it. That kind of rhetoric can work with people. And then if there are affluent liberals who are highly motivated by racial injustice, you can have different messaging to them.
Sure.
The fact is, different messaging.
Well, no, the affluent liberals are calling on the National Guard to check your bag in the New York subway. That's their new focus.
The Karens.
Right, the Kathys in this case, Kathy Hochul. All right, this was a tough news. The tragedy of
and I'm mostly just very sorry for this person's family, and it can't be easy to have their picture and suicide splashed across the front pages of the New York Times and all over the internet. So I think it is regretful, and we should just try to give people more privacy when that is possible.
Yeah. All right, stick around. We have more Rising for you right after this.